happy Friday, and welcome to the EL Library Read Aloud of Nightbooks by J.A. White, read with permission from HarperCollins Publishers. So today we are moving along quickly to our wrap up with this book. We're on chapter 19, and we're going to review a little bit about what happened yesterday in chapter 18. It's suddenly coming to we might find out some answers here about Natasha. So let's see. So they are on the threshold. Remember, they opened the door. They found the bone keys. They're on their way out. Natasha is still sleeping. And Alex steps over the threshold and into a forest with tall, tall pine trees that seem to touch the sky. They can't believe they have finally made it outside. They quickly lock the door behind them to make sure that Natasha, if she does wake up, that she can't get out. Because it makes them feel safe, The trees are packed together, but there's one path leading into a deeper darkness, and they choose to head down that path versus go all scattered through the trees. It's interesting because it's not cold in the forest, which is a little disconcerting to them. And Yasmin also spies some of the plants from the nursery. Again, it doesn't make very much sense. It's very, very strange. Suddenly they begin to hear sounds. It's like a rustling, a clicking, and a clap of approaching footsteps. And it's an entire herd that's coming in their direction. So, of course, what do? They run. But it's not long before the herd catches up with them. And they are the grossest, grotesque-looking creatures. Things that Alex says that are made from nightmares. They look kind of like unicorns. They have one big eye, one small eye that are blood red color, and they have the horn that's as sharp as a razor. So Alex in his head, he's trying to connect them to the unicorn girl. It's too strange and specific to be a coincidence, so he's trying to make that connection. But right now he can't think of that because the unicorns are about to impale both of them, and they're just trying to stay alive. So the unicorns are like jabbing at them, but with their horns, but every time it just falls short. And Alex notices that the horns never cross that line separating the path from the forest. So it's like there's an invisible wall there. Soon the unicorns are spooked by something and they retreat. Alex tries to figure out what they're spooked by, but the only thing he can see in the distance is a tree that has like a gouged out area. So he goes to investigate that a little bit further. He walks up to the tree, and he realizes that the bark of the tree is like a second skin. And then he realizes it's red wallpaper with a black floral pattern. They're still in the apartment. So they're devastated, but they work. Yasmin kind of talks them out of it, and they work to revise their plan. And they continue on the path. So they're coming up to a hill, and from the top of the hill, in the clearing below, they see a tiny house made entirely of candy. They begin to believe that Natasha might be the same witch that captured Hansel and Gretel. They approach the house, which smells sweet and yummy. Alex he doesn't feel right about it. He feels like something is terribly wrong, and he tries to turn to Yasmin and say that, but it's too late. Yasmin is shoveling giant marshmallows into her mouth, and then she drops to the ground. And Alex, he doesn't remember taking a bite of candy either, but as the chapter ends, it's a warm, soothing, blissfully sweet taste in his mouth, and then he falls flat too. So that's where we ended, with both of them kind of on the ground, flat out. But we'll start today with chapter 19, called Natasha's Story. Excuse me. The entire world was shaking. Alex groggily opened his eyes. He heard rattling glass, felt something solid vibrating beneath his head. He tried to remember where he was. Candy house, he thought, the gears of his brain beginning to spin again. I ate a doorknob? Why did I eat a doorknob? The world blurred into focus. He was on the floor of a kitchen. It looked like something you might see during a field trip to a historical village. Stone floor and walls, long benches beneath a simple wooden table. Across from him was a massive iron door. It was partially open, revealing a deep recess filled with charred wood. I'm inside the candy house, Alex thought. That's the oven from the fairy tale where the witch... Terror slapped him awake. He pushed himself into a sitting position. As he did, the room finally stopped shaking. Behind him, a chopping noise. Alex straightened his glasses and turned around. Natasha was standing on the other side of the room. She wasn't facing him, but he could see the butcher's knife in her hand. She raised and lowered it with violent enthusiasm, hacking away at something on the wooden counter in front of her. Finally, Natasha said without turning around. It's been almost 2 days. I thought you were never going to wake up. Even after all these years, the magic in that candy still packs a wallop. Lures kids into eating it, whether they want to or not, and then there's little else to do but wait. You know how powerful sleeping spells can be, don't you, Alex? To Natasha's left, a cauldron hung from an iron hook. Steam rose from its surface, courtesy of the flickering flames beneath it. The spicy smell of stew filled the room. Where's Yasmin? He asked. Alive, Natasha said. For now, provided you help me. Help you with what? Natasha flung a handful of something red and stringy into the cauldron. It made a sizzling noise as it hit the broth. You felt the house rumble, Natasha said. 3rd time this hour. It's getting worse. She needs a story, Alex. I tried reading her one of the old ones from the library. It doesn't work anymore. She only wants yours. What do you mean, she? Alex asked. I thought you said the stories were for the apartment. Natasha slammed the knife down. She is the apartment, Alex. Don't you understand anything? They're one and the same now. Natasha turned around. Her face was haggard and drawn. Her eyes sunk deep in their sockets. Would you like to hear a story? She asked. Alex nodded and pulled himself onto a bench at the kitchen table. Things were still fuzzy, and the longer Natasha talked, the more time he had to clear his head. He would have to be at his best to rescue Yasmin. The stew popped and bubbled. How old do you think I am? Natasha asked. Alex considered the question. What should I admit I know? He decided that the time for deceit had passed. In your hundreds, Alex said. I'm 29. Well, you look 29, Alex corrected her, but you've been alive for 29 years, Natasha said. Almost 30. I was going to give you a slice of my birthday cake in a few weeks. I don't see that happening now. That can't be right, Alex said, shaking his head. The blue mist. Ah, said Natasha, amused. You thought it was what? Some kind of immortality oil? It doesn't exist. The blue mist isn't magic? Oh, it's magic, all right. Just not the kind you're thinking of. We'll get to that later. Let me start from the beginning. She stirred the stew with a long wooden handle. When I was a little girl, younger than you, about 20 years ago, Aunt Gris took me prisoner. The who? Alex asked, baffled. Took you prisoner? What are you talking about? Her full name was Griselda, Natasha said, snapping the syllables with her tongue, but she insisted that we call her Aunt Gris. She was the original witch who lived in the apartment. For all I know, she might be the original witch, period. She created all this, the candy house, the forest, the magic rooms. Natasha smiled slightly. You'll never believe how she tricked me into crossing the threshold. I was obsessed with unicorns at the time, and I... Followed one inside the apartment building? Alex said, the words spilling from his stunned lips. Natasha stopped stirring. How did you know that? She asked. Your unicorn girl? Alex exclaimed, dizzy with revelation. What? You never wrote your name, he added, so that's what we called you. We read what you wrote inside the storybooks when you were a girl. Natasha straightened, the gears of her memory starting to turn. I did. Right in the storybooks, didn't I? She asked. It seems so long ago now, another life. That's how you knew about the sleeping oil, isn't it? Alex nodded. Only, I never wrote down the final ingredient. So how? Natasha looked abashed, like a student who finally figures out an answer that should have been obvious from the start. That story about the baker's daughter. You tricked me into telling you. Yes, Alex said. Natasha looked at him with something approaching respect. You're smarter than you look, storyteller, she said. Alex disagreed. If he was that intelligent, he would have figured out Natasha's true identity long ago. As it was, his understanding of past events had been completely shattered, making him wonder what else he had gotten wrong. He felt like he had been reading the pages of a story in the wrong order. Aunt Gris, Alex said, pushing his glasses back, you don't mean to say that she's the witch from Hansel and Gretel, do you? That's just a story. It never really happened. Says the boy sitting in a house made of candy, Natasha replied, raising her eyebrows. I don't know who came first, the witch or the story. In any case, she's the one who's been alive forever. It wasn't any oils or potions that did it, though. No, the magic Aunt Grist used was far older than that. She ate children and devoured their youth. Natasha's eyes looked past him at the massive oven built into the wall. Alex took a quick glance and turned away, his imagination blasting him with unwanted images. I used to love the witch in Hansel and Gretel, he thought, the way she tried to fatten Hansel up so there would be more of him to cook. So creepy. That was before he knew she was real. I wasn't the only one she captured, Natasha said, staring at the oven with great intensity. There was a boy, a few years older than me, Ian. He watched out for me, taught me what I needed to do to stay safe until Aunt Gris started to grow old again and needed to replenish her lost youth. Natasha scrubbed her hands together as though washing them beneath running water. She made me clean the oven afterward, closed the door behind me until it was all spick and span. I was in there for hours in the dark. That was the day I decided that I was never going to be powerless again. Alex felt a chill run up his spine. Unicorn Girl climbed into the oven that day, he thought, and someone completely different climbed out. It made him sad. I waited for my opportunity, Natasha said. I read Aunt Gris her nightly tale and played the faithful little servant. The library, if you haven't guessed by now, belonged to her. She's the one obsessed with scary stories. Natasha's expression grew sly. But I pretended to love them, just like her, and in time Aunt Gris grew to trust me. One day, she took me through her secret door to this very kitchen and told me how the apartment was just a facade to trick children. The true house is the one we're sitting in right now. It's the beating heart, the source of all the magic. Natasha ladled stew into 2 clay bowls. She slid one across the table and took a seat. She taught me a few potions, too, Natasha continued. Nothing complicated, and nothing that she ever imagined I could use against her. But she underestimated my gift for such things, and one night, we were here in the candy house just before story time, I slipped a sleeping potion into her tea. She fell to the floor, and I listened, ever so carefully, until her breathing became slow and steady. Then I raised my knife into the air. She glanced at Alex's stew. You're not eating. What? He asked, as though awoken from a dream. I'm not hungry. Are you sure? Natasha stirred her stew with a wooden spoon. Steam rose in undulating waves. I made it special, just for you. Alex stared down at his bowl with a growing sense of dismay. He had never smelled stew like this before. He poked it with his spoon. Chunks of white meat bobbed to the surface. A horrible thought slithered into his mind. Where's Lenore? He asked quietly. Lenore? Natasha asked, lingering on the word as though it were a name she hadn't heard in years. You mean the useless beast who betrayed me? She took a healthy bite of stew and chewed it thoughtfully. Don't worry about her. Alex stared down at his stew, fighting the nausea rising up his throat. She couldn't have, he thought. That's too horrible, even for her. Wait, Natasha exclaimed, choking back laughter. Did you think I cooked the cat? Didn't you? Alex asked. Natasha exploded with laughter. She pounded the table, guffawing uncontrollably. Why in the world would I ruin a perfectly good stew? She asked. You know how old that cat is? She's probably all string and gristle inside. Unsure what to believe, Alex re-examined the stew in front of him. I guess that could be chicken, he thought. And as for the strange smell, who knows what weird spices she threw in there. At first I was mad you tried to escape, Natasha said, and I won't lie, I considered some pretty horrific punishments. But then I remembered that I had done the exact same thing when I was your age, which got me thinking, maybe things could be different between us. That's why I'm telling you my story, Alex. You're a child of darkness, just like me. You don't need to return to a world that doesn't understand. You can make a home here, as I have. Not as my captive, as a friend. Alex stared at Natasha in utter disbelief. I'm nothing like you, he started to scream. You've hurt people. How can I ever be your friend? But then he saw Natasha's downcast eyes, and the nervous way she plucked at the tiny hairs on her arm, and a shocking realization kept him from speaking. She's lonely, he thought. It was strange to imagine that Natasha might desire human companionship just like anyone else, but he supposed it made sense. She had been alone in the apartment for 2 decades. He had no desire to be her friend, of course, but he couldn't just turn her down. She would be furious, and then Alex wouldn't be able to help Yasmin and Lenore at all. I have to go along with it for now, he thought. Put her at ease. I didn't want to admit it at first, Alex said, managing a small smile. But in a strange way, I do feel at home here. I knew it, Natasha exclaimed, throwing her arms into the air. She seemed so genuinely thrilled that Alex almost felt guilty for lying to her. You won't regret this, Alex. Of course, you're going to have to work your way back into my trust, but after that, things are... The house trembled. Stew spilled down the swinging cauldron and spattered into the flames. The disturbance only lasted a few seconds, but it was long enough to apply a fresh coat of worry to Natasha's face. We can't wait any longer, she said, sliding off the bench. You have to tell her a story, something she's never heard before. Why do you keep saying she? Alex asked. Natasha smiled with wicked delight, and she wrapped her arm around his shoulder. Forget all about your ghosts and goblins and vampires, she said. I'm going to show you something really scary. And whatever that really scary thing is, we'll have to wait until Monday, because that is the end of our chapter for today. But we will be right back here on Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock, right here on the Library, Edward Little Library YouTube channel, and the links for this are going to be posted later today on both Instagram and Facebook. So I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. It's raining right now, but hopefully that'll clear up for the weekend. Have a great weekend, and I hope you can listen in again on Monday afternoon. Thank you.